Hello folks, and welcome to yet another wintry episode of the Audiophile Man. What do I have for you this time around? Well, under its Attessa range, we have the Roksan Streaming Amplifier. So what do you get for the asking price of what, £1,600? I'll put other denominations below. Apart from the steel case and anodized front panel, you get quite a lot of watts, 80 all told. That's 80 watts into 8 ohms, incidentally, and those 80 watts are held in place by a chassis spanning 190 millimeters by 600 by 565 millimeters. So while this box is a full width unit, it's fairly low slung, so should fit into most shelving units. The weight, well, it's pretty weighty. You're looking at a hefty 10.48 kilograms. And that is mainly down to the large toroidal power supply and plenty of internal heat sinks. I expect to hear decent bass response from this box, but we'll see. While we're talking about the insides, you'll also note the Texas Instruments Burr Brown PCM 5242 DAC chip, and that can push out 32 bits, 384 kHz PCM. This is a Class AB design that looks fine. Aesthetically, it's fine, which is something I never said about the older products in the Roksan line. Roksan always, to my eyes, had a unique sense of style. The Candy range looked like it belonged on a moon base in a 50s retro comic. The Caspians, well, they almost had a Scandinavian minimalist simplicity about them. While the Oxygens, they look like an art installation. This Attessa, well, it's fine. It tries to be a Caspian, but falls short in a slightly half-hearted manner. That sense of looking back to the Caspian was an issue for me. For example, nowadays, if output windows are going to be featured at all, they're all about offering the user lots of information on large, bright, easy-to-read screens. This chassis-spanning output strip looks rather old-fashioned by comparison. Too much of the thin output strip is devoted to the volume ladder output, with only a tiny space on the left allocated to everything else. And even then, you have to move towards the amplifier to better see what you've selected. I do like the orange light output though. Makes a change from being blinded by bright white beam lights that I've seen on some hi-fi components. So let's have a quick tour. On the front left is your power button, then transport buttons, the small display showing your source. To the right of that is a large rotary volume knob, and if you push and twist at the same time, it acts as a source selector. This selector also has a haptic feedback, so you will feel a certain amount of vibration in use. I personally consider this feature a pointless gimmick and a waste of money. This is not a PlayStation, folks. To the right, and spanning about, 47 feet, is that volume ladder. At the far right is a 3.5mm headphone port, and it's 3.5mm because purely for no other reason than it fits the aesthetic. So what we're saying here is that a sonic decision has been made purely because of aesthetics. To me, that's disappointing. I would have preferred a 6.35mm socket because there are more audiophile headphone designs out there with that default form of termination. According to Roksan, the 3.5mm port was, and I quote, checked for performance and made no difference. Adapters are readily available, unquote. Now, look, you might agree with Roksan, so that's not a problem. I do have a problem, and I do not agree with Roksan. Adding a converter adds yet another fence for the sound signal to jump. I can hear a lowering in sound quality with a converter. I prefer my connections pure, direct, and literally to the point. For me, it's another reason to dislike the aesthetics. Let's flip around to the rear and let's hope we can find a bit more cheer, shall we? Well, I ain't too sure because the rear shows all of the speaker terminals pushed to the far left, which was done apparently to minimize internal cable lengths. However, if you look inside, that length of cable connected to the speaker terminals looks pretty long to me. To me, that doesn't look as though it's a minimalized internal cable length. What do you think, folks? It looks pretty long to me. As it stands, this quadrant of speaker terminals pushed over to the left may cause installation issues if you're using short left channel cables, and maybe they have to stretch a bit further than they're used to. To me, it would have been far better to have a pair of speaker sockets on the left and also on the right. And if you look on the inside of the chassis, I think there is space to do that very thing. Over to the rear again, and next are 3 single-ended inputs, including a moving magnet phono amplifier and ground screw, a grub screw. After the preamp outputs is a group of coax and optical inputs, then an Ethernet port, which I used during the review. You also get a pair of USB ports. Now, one of those USB ports is used to house the Wi-Fi dongle for use with Bluos. This dongle was small and compact, but that's now been changed to a much larger model because the smaller unit is no longer being produced. Now, I asked Roksan about this, and they said to me that they had looked for a smaller unit but failed to find one they were happy with. So this particular larger model is now the default dongle from now on. Because this is a larger unit though, make sure you have clearance at the rear of the chassis so you can fit the thing into your shelf in the first place, because it does stick out quite a way, as you can see. Skipping quickly over the service port and the triggers, the far right shows a standard IEC socket. So that's the tech, folks. How does this thing sound? Let's find out, shall we? To begin, I plugged in my CD transport, the Audiolab 6000 CDT, connected that to my benchmark DAC, and plugged that into the back of the Roksan, and I played Lusher's album Spooky and the song Stray. Now, this song lasts a mere couple of minutes, but it offers a lot for a test track. Delicately formed harmonies where each voice should be recognized, a nicely separated bass rhythm guitar and fragile cymbal taps. Then, from 1 minute and 22 seconds, crashing rock acting as an extended outro, in which you hope you can still fathom detail without being swamped by noise. A short and challenging piece, therefore. Sound-wise then, well, I was impressed by the large and powerful presentation from the Roksan, which at times sounded like it meant serious business. And let me emphasize that power. For the price and the specs, it's a wall. The sense of bass drive was paramount here, and it fed into every area of the sound envelope. That meant the guitar strums had a sense of delicacy, yes, detail, true, but also weight from the lower end. Vocals could be fragile and nuanced. In addition, though, supporting that was a certain amount of gravitas. Instrumental separation was excellent. That is, each instrument and voice was nicely spaced apart. There was no blurring of information here, no bass bloom, no fuzzy upper mids, a good thing. I then removed my external benchmark DAC and plugged my transport directly into the Roksan's internal DAC via the coax. The performance of the internal DAC was very good indeed. Now, it wasn't as good as the external model, but I didn't think it would be. The external DAC offered a richer performance, more detail, superior imagery, but the internal model, well, that'll be sufficient for many users out there. It provides a well-rounded output. Even for those looking to upgrade to an external DAC in the future, the internal mode will serve as a usable option while funds are being saved. One point I must add though, if you're listening to CD or vinyl, and we'll get to that in a moment, I would advise removing the Wi-Fi dongle because that does add some high frequency noise to the output, giving the sound a bit of an edge in the upper mids at high volumes. I mentioned vinyl, and I did a test next on the internal phono amplifier. I plugged in my Riga RP3 and I tried that internal unit while playing ELO's classic rendition of rollover Beethoven. Performance, well, wasn't quite as good again as a comparable external model, with the internal model lacking mid-range insight and bass character in comparison. Even so, for an internal Phono amp, that rich personality from both the mid-range and bass was present and correct, while there was enough here to satisfy those who only want to play vinyl occasionally, and it'll also satisfy vinyl fans who are looking for an external upgrade. Next, I tried the headphone amplifier, and it was good to hear that the headphones followed the general personality of the main amplifier. And that doesn't always happen with amplifier designs, I have to say. So I was hearing a strong bass output, although the mids were maybe slightly rolled off via my Meze 99 headphones. Even so, as a rock source, the headphone amplifier provided a strong and meaty performance. Next, I turned to Bluetooth, and I installed and ran the app called Maestro Unite, which basically upgraded my streaming firmware, although it does allow several tweaks, such as headphone sensitivity and so on, but I left everything in the default mode. I then played Marvin Gaye's Mercy Mercy Me via my iPhone and via Bluetooth. Now, this Roksan product isn't described as purely an amplifier. It is, in big, bold font, described as a streaming amplifier. So, by its very name, Roksan is certainly pushing the streaming aspect of the unit above all else. So it's important that this part of the performance is good. And yes, Bluetooth performance was good via my phone. Now, my test track here was a mere lossy AAC file, and so didn't exactly provide the best source. But for a lossy file sent over Bluetooth to an iPhone of all things, I thought the Attessa did very well indeed. Now, if you push to very high volumes, then yes, sure, the edgy mid-range and the tizzy treble would certainly reveal themselves, but that's to be expected because of the file in use here. But at acceptable volumes, the response was excellent. Balanced in presentation, plenty of detail for a file of this type. The soundstage was broad, vocals were packed with emotion, percussion was understated, piano normally hid at the rear of the mix, but the Attessa, well, it was highlighted here, and that was a little surprising. I then upped the ante, and I pushed out both Nick Drake and the Doves via my Aston & Kern Can Alpha at 24-bit 96k the pair. And if anything, the balance was better realized via the digital section than it was in the analog domain. The issue I had, though, with Bluetooth per se and this Roksan unit is the codecs. They only support aptX, and so the mids and the trebles at high volumes, even at higher resolutions, sounded a bit thin, sounded a bit weedy. You don't even get aptX HD, and you certainly don't get higher end codecs like LDAC. Now, for the price of this amp, I want LDAC. That would have made Bluetooth sing. As it is, Bluetooth is good, but only goes so far. For a streaming amplifier, and I emphasize streaming amplifier at this price, I certainly wanted more. I then turned to Bluos, connecting the Attessa via a downloaded app. The Bluos app itself, well, that took a long time to even notice the Attessa, but that's possibly down to my own network. In fact, it took a couple of hours of plugging away. So if your unit doesn't connect first time, keep at it. Once done, the Bluos amp performed another upgrade. The player itself on this occasion. The install section, though, was particularly slow. Now, what I wanted to do here was access the less than perfect, the lower bitrate sources, just to see how the streaming output coped. If the sound was good here, then top-of-the-line sources would certainly fly. That's why I ended up listening to Dire Straits' Sultans of Swing via Amazon. And again, the Attessa sounded rather more balanced and neutral via the digital domain than it did in the analog domain, backed by a broad soundstage with plenty of sonic highlights. The lead guitar here was pleasingly complex, and in general terms the presentation was rather comforting. Then I flicked to something called Calm Radio, which was new to me, although apparently it's been going for over 10 years now. Again, this was a lossy source. The output, though, nevertheless, was surprisingly focused, while it tripped through a version of No Woman, No Cry from, of all people, Boney M. Full of air and space around the mids, I was again surprised at the quality of the sound from this less than perfect source. Running up the ladder and streaming Cobas and a selection of tracks from The Cure, I was happy to hear a relatively balanced and informative playback with a wide soundstage, substantial bass response, and some pleasingly detailed performances from both lead guitar and vocals. And that's basically the review of the Attessa Streaming Amplifier from Roksan. Let me give you a few thoughts. I've got a few final thoughts to give you. I'll give you some pros and cons and then a rating. Now, let me remind you, Roksan describe this product as a streaming amplifier. They don't call it an amplifier, they call it a streaming amplifier. Almost as if that's the priority. That's the order of play. That's the focus. That's how Roksan wants you to view this box. And I can see that. As a straight amplifier, one with the usual physical sources, the Attessa offers a pleasing delivery with a good foundational bass that supports all frequencies. As a streaming device, the Attessa was arguably more successful. I think the digital section of this design is possibly better balanced in sonic terms, possibly better realized, whether you're talking Bluos or Bluetooth. I was pleasantly surprised at the Attessa's sonic performance in the digital domain. Although, I have to say, I do feel shortchanged with the Bluetooth performance because of the lack of codec choice. Despite my nitpicks, this box is a real hub for your all-round hi-fi entertainment. And that's what I'm rating this amplifier as, an all-round hub. So on that basis, I had fun listening to the Attessa. It's pleasing to the ear, warming to the heart, you might say, and certainly packed with features, pros and cons. And in the good section, well, I ended this review with the words, and I'll start the pros and cons with the same words. It's feature packed. There's all kinds of things you can do with this thing. Next, I liked the streaming output, which was very well balanced and well considered. Next, the solid bass, especially in the analog domain. There was quite a powerful foundational low frequency output. Finally, the external dongle. I quite like having Wi-Fi fitted externally. Firstly, you can remove the thing when you're listening to vinyl and CD to lower high frequency noise. And secondly, it's going to protect from microphony and vibration if the dongle is external to the chassis and not internal, cuddled up to the rest of the electronics. In the bad section, well, I wasn't too happy with the selection of, or lack of selection of codecs for Bluetooth. Next, I didn't like the old-fashioned aesthetics, and I didn't like how the aesthetics influenced sonic decisions. That is the size of the socket for the headphone amplifier. And finally, well, the size of that headphone port. I would have much preferred a 6.35mm option for an amplifier of this, well, of this price point. However, despite my nitpicks, despite the irritations, I have to look at the streaming amplifier from Roksan as a product in the round. I need to look at the product as a whole. And because of that, I'm going to give the Roksan streaming amplifier an award-winning rating, an 8 out of 10, and a groovy. Congratulations to Roksan. And that's a lot, folks. Thanks for staying to the end of this video. Before you go, can you do me a favor? Can you just do me a favor and click down below on the subscribe and the like buttons? Just helps this channel to grow, which I think is a good thing. Also, down below, check out the links. I'll put one down there for Roksan. My links too, to my Patreon page, where you'll find the exclusive hi-fi news, etc. video published every single week, and there's one out this week. Also, check out my website. I'll put a link for that as well down there, and also my Facebook group, which you're welcome to join. And that's about it, folks. what's going on? I think there should be a Music Alerts video coming out at the end of this week. Possibly. I ain't sure. You and I will both find out when Friday turns up. I don't know right now. I think it will. Anyway, check it out. If not, I'll be back on the following Sunday with another hi-fi review. Hope to have your company. Until then, folks, bye-bye for now.